I spent 10 years waiting for the boy who promised me forever. When he finally came back, he looked me right in the eyes and asked for my name. The rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grand Zenith Hotel sounded like a rhythmic drumming of the past, a constant reminder of the day everything fell apart. I straightened my blazer, checking my reflection for the 10th time. 10 years. It had been exactly 3,650 days since I last saw Julian Thorne. Back then, he was the boy with messy hair and a guitar, a boy who promised to marry me under the old oak tree in our small hometown. Now, he was the ice king of the venture capital world, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms with a mix of awe and terror. I walked into the VIP lounge, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. There he was, silhouetted against the gray city skyline. He looked the same, yet entirely different. The soft edges of youth had been replaced by a sharp, predatory jawline and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen a dream in a decade. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my college tuition, and he didn't even look up when I entered. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice barely a whisper, fighting to stay steady. "I'm Elara Vance. I'll be your lead consultant for the merger." He didn't look up from his tablet. He just extended a cold, manicured hand, his focus entirely on the data scrolling before him. "Nice to meet you, Miss Vance. Let's get to work. I don't like wasting time on pleasantries." I froze. My hand trembled as it touched his. I waited for the spark, for the widening of his eyes, for the stutter in his breath that would tell me he knew who I was. But he didn't flinch. He didn't pause. He didn't look at me with the recognition I had spent a decade dreaming about. He didn't remember. The boy who once knew every freckle on my back and the exact pitch of my laughter now treated me like a line item on a spreadsheet. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into silent, jagged pieces that cut me from the inside out. "Is there a problem?" he asked, finally looking up. His gaze was icy, professional, and utterly devoid of love. "No," I lied, my throat burning with the salt of unshed tears. "No problem at all, Mr. Thorne." The first week of the merger was a living nightmare. Julian was demanding, brilliant, and completely oblivious to the ghost standing right in front of him. We spent 14 hours a day locked in high-rise offices, the city lights twinkling below us like the shards of the life we used to share. Every time I mentioned a detail about our hometown, or even a specific coffee blend he used to love, he reacted as if he were hearing it for the very first time. I felt like a phantom, haunting a man who had forgotten he was ever alive. "The architecture here is efficient," Julian remarked late one Tuesday, glancing out at the skyline with a detached air. "It used to be more than that," I said before I could stop myself, the words tumbling out of a heart that was tired of being quiet. "The old pier used to have a carousel that played La Vie en Rose every Sunday. Do you remember? Do people still go there?" Julian paused, a slight frown marring his perfect forehead. For a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow, a ghost of a memory struggling to break through a wall of ice. "The pier was torn down years ago, Miss Vance. Nostalgia is a luxury I don't afford myself. It clouds judgment." "My name is Elara," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "Please, stop calling me Miss Vance." He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. "I'm aware of your name. I simply find Miss Vance more professional for our current environment." He turned back to the spreadsheets, but I noticed his hand was gripping his pen so hard his knuckles were stark white. Why was he so determined to keep me at a distance? I left the office that night feeling like a shadow in my own life. As I walked to the elevator, I heard a heavy crash from inside his office. I turned back, peeking through the glass. Julian was standing by the window, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking as he breathed heavily. "Elara," I heard him whisper to the empty, cold room. "Why does that name feel like a knife in my chest?" The charity gala was the social event of the year, a glittering masquerade designed to hide truths behind silk and sequins. I wore a backless midnight blue gown, the exact color of the sky the night we had our first kiss behind the bleachers. I knew it was a gamble, a desperate attempt to trigger a memory, but I needed to know if the Julian I loved was still buried somewhere deep inside that expensive suit. The ballroom was a sea of masks and forced smiles. I found Julian at the bar, nursing a scotch and looking devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo. When he saw me, his glass paused halfway to his lips. The Ice King mask he wore so well finally slipped, replaced by a raw, naked curiosity. "You look," he started, his voice thick and low. "Professional," I challenged, stepping into his personal space. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and the faint hint of rain hit me like a physical blow, transporting me back to 2014. "Breathtaking," he corrected, his voice a gravelly whisper. We were forced to dance when the music slowed to a haunting cello melody. He placed his hand on the small of my back, his palm warm against my skin. His thumb brushed over a small, jagged scar, a scar from a childhood accident we had shared when we fell off his bike. He flinched violently. His breath hitched, and for a moment the music seemed to fade away. "You're shaking," I whispered, our chests inches apart, the heat between us becoming unbearable. "I don't know who you are," he rasped, his eyes searching mine with a sudden, desperate intensity that frightened me. "But every time I look at you, I feel like I'm drowning in a life I don't remember living. Who are you, Elara? Why do I feel like I've lost the most important part of myself?" Before I could speak the truth, a woman in a blood-red dress swept in, placing a possessive hand on Julian's arm. "Julian, darling, the press is waiting for a statement." He pulled away from me, the wall of ice slamming back down instantly. But as he walked away, he looked back over his shoulder, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't see a stranger. I saw a man who was absolutely terrified that he was waking up. The following evening, a violent storm broke over the city, mirroring the chaos in my heart. I was leaving the office late when I saw a familiar black sedan pulled over on the side of the road, smoke billowing from under the hood. Julian was standing in the pouring rain, looking uncharacteristically lost, his hair matted to his forehead. I pulled over immediately, the tires splashing through deep puddles. "Julian, get in before you catch pneumonia." He didn't argue. He climbed into my passenger seat, soaked to the bone and shivering. He looked smaller somehow, his usual composure washed away by the rain. I drove him to my apartment, which was only 5 minutes away, knowing it was the only way to get him dry and safe. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of things unsaid. I gave him a thick towel and a pair of oversized sweatpants I kept for lounging. As he dried his hair, his eyes began to wander around my small, cozy living room. They stopped abruptly on a small, silver-framed photo on my bookshelf, a photo of 2 teenagers at a summer fair, their faces blurred by the flash but their joy radiating off the paper. He walked toward it as if in a trance, his hand trembling as he picked it up. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rain hitting the roof. "It's mine," I said softly, standing by the kitchen counter. "It's been mine for 10 years. He turned the photo over. On the back, in my faded teenage handwriting, were the words, "Julian and Elara. Forever, 2014. His face went deathly pale. He dropped the photo, the glass shattering against the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. He gripped his head, a low, guttural groan escaping his lips. "It hurts. It hurts so much. Why is it all coming back at once?" "Julian, talk to me. What's happening?" I ran to him, catching him as he slumped against the wall, his eyes rolling back. "The accident," he choked out, the words coming in gasps. "The summer after graduation. They told me I was alone. They told me there was no one else in the car. They told me Elara was just a hallucination I had in the coma. They made me believe you weren't real." Julian sat on my sofa, wrapped in a wool blanket, the truth pouring out of him like a broken dam. After the car crash 10 years ago, his parents, who had always looked down on our towny romance, had seized the opportunity provided by his retrograde amnesia. They moved him across the country while he was still unconscious, told him he had been alone in the vehicle, and systematically erased every trace of my existence from his life. They said I had a traumatic brain injury that caused persistent false memories of a girl, Julian said, his voice hollow and broken. "I spent years in expensive therapy sessions trying to kill the image of you in my mind. I thought I was losing my mind, Elara. I thought I was obsessed with a ghost. I waited for you at the hospital every day until they banned me, I cried, the tears I had held back for a decade finally flooding my face. I wrote hundreds of letters. I went to your house until your father threatened to have me arrested. They told me you had recovered, moved on, and that you never wanted to see my face again because I reminded you of the crash. He looked at me, and finally the fog truly cleared. The Ice King was gone, replaced by the boy who used to play guitar for me until the sun came up. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a tenderness that made my heart ache. I didn't remember your name with my mind, Elara, but my soul never stopped screaming for you. That's why I came back to this city. I told myself it was for a merger, but I was just a moth drawn back to the only light I ever knew. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in 10 years I felt like I could breathe. But the peace was shattered by a sharp vibration. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an anonymous message from a blocked number. Keep your distance from him, Elara. His father is watching your every move. If you don't leave the city tonight, Julian's career and his safety will be the price you pay. Fear tasted like cold copper in my mouth. Julian's father, Arthur Thorne, was a man who moved mountains and crushed lives to get his way. I didn't tell Julian about the text immediately. I couldn't bear to break the fragile peace of our reunion. I watched him sleep on my couch that night, his face peaceful for the first time since we met again, his hand still reaching out for mine even in his dreams. The next morning, while Julian was in the shower, I was summoned by a black car to a private, windowless club downtown. Arthur Thorne sat there in a leather armchair, looking like a vulture in a bespoke suit. "You're a persistent girl, Elara," he said, sipping tea as if he weren't currently destroying my life. "But Julian is on the verge of becoming the most powerful man in the financial world. He doesn't need a reminder of his weak past or a girl from a dead-end town. He needs a clean slate." "He deserves the truth, Arthur. You stole 10 years of his life." I snapped, my fists clenched at my sides. "The truth will break him," Arthur countered coldly. "The trauma of realizing his own parents gaslit him for a decade. He'll spiral. He'll lose his focus, his company, everything. Or I could make sure your firm loses every contract it has and you'll be blacklisted from this industry forever. Leave him. Tell him you were just playing him to get an edge in the merger. Make him hate you. It's the only way to save him." I walked out of that club feeling physically sick. I went back to the office, my heart heavy with the intent to resign and disappear for his sake. But when the elevator doors opened, Julian was standing in the middle of the lobby. He wasn't the Ice King anymore. He was standing there with a guitar case in one hand and a look of absolute defiance in his eyes. "I remember everything now," he whispered, his voice booming in the quiet lobby. "I remember the oak tree, Elara. I remember the promise I made when we were 18, and I'm not letting them take it again." He didn't care about the cameras or the shocked whispers of the staff. He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the exit. "We're leaving, Elara. We're going to the one place they can't find us." We drove for 5 hours, leaving the suffocating city lights behind. We ended up at a small, secluded cabin nestled by a dark, still lake, a place Julian had bought in secret 3 years ago. He told me he didn't know why he bought it at the time, but he had been guided by a subconscious memory of a place we once described as our dream home during a high school camping trip. Inside, the air was chilled, but the tension between us was a living, breathing heat. We were two people who had been robbed of our youth, trying to cram 10 years of lost longing, missed birthdays, and stolen kisses into a single night. "My father threatened you, didn't he?" "At the club," Julian asked as he knelt to light the fireplace. The orange glow began to dance across his face. "It doesn't matter," I said, stepping toward him, my heart pounding. "Nothing matters except the fact that you're here, that you finally know who I am." He stood up and looked at me, his eyes dark with a mixture of old pain and new desire. "I've spent 10 years feeling like a ghost in my own skin. I've spent 10 years looking for a face I couldn't name. I don't want to wait another second to show you how much I love you." He leaned in, his lips brushing mine with the softness of a prayer. It started as a gentle question, a rediscovery of the girl he once loved. But then the fire between us exploded into a desperate, raw hunger. He lifted me up, my legs wrapping around his waist as he carried me toward the bedroom. The world outside, the threats, the corporate wars, the lies of his parents, simply ceased to exist. In that small cabin, we weren't a consultant and a CEO. We were just Julian and Elara, finally coming home. The bedroom was filled with the scent of aged pine and the soft, rhythmic crackle of the hearth from the other room. Julian laid me down on the bed with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes. He worshipped every inch of me, his hands tracing the curves of my body as if he were memorizing a map he never wanted to lose again. "I love you," he whispered against my skin, the words a sacred vow. "I never stopped loving you, Elara. Even when I was sleeping, even when I was cold, my heart was beating your name." When we finally became one, it wasn't just a physical act. It was an exorcism of the last 10 years of loneliness. Every touch was a memory regained. The way his hands fit perfectly in mine, the way he kissed the spot behind my ear, the way our breaths hitched in unison. It was intense, emotional, and deeply healing. We moved together in a beautiful chaos of limbs and whispered promises, the rhythm steady and true like a heartbeat that had finally found its pace. As we lay tangled in the sheets afterward, the silver moonlight streaming through the window and illuminating our joined hands, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since I was 18. We were whole. We were found. But as Julian drifted into a heavy sleep, his hand still gripping mine as if afraid I'd vanish into the mist, I saw a sudden flash of light outside the window. A black car was parked at the end of the long, dirt driveway. The headlights cut through the darkness like twin daggers. They had found us. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Julian, and threw on a silk robe. My heart was cold with resolve as I stepped out onto the porch. Arthur Thorne was standing there in the dirt, his expensive shoes ruined by the mud, flanked by 2 stone-faced security guards. "You're making a catastrophic mistake, Elara," he said, his voice a low hiss in the night air. "Julian is fragile. This romance will destroy the stability he's worked a decade to build." "He's not fragile, Arthur. He's human," I said, standing my ground on the top step. "And he's done living the hollow lie you built for him. You didn't build a career for him, you built a prison." Suddenly, the cabin door behind me creaked open. Julian stepped out, fully dressed in his black shirt and jeans, his eyes flashing with a cold, sharp fury that made even his father take a step back. He wasn't the Ice King anymore. He was a storm. He held his phone up, the screen glowing. "I recorded every word of your conversation with Elara at the club, Father," Julian said, his voice vibrating with power. "And I just sent the audio file to the entire board of directors. Along with the documented medical records of the repressive therapy you forced me into to keep me from my memories. Your reign of control ends tonight." Arthur's face went from pale to a sickly purple. "You'll destroy the Thorne name. You'll be nothing without me." "I'd rather be a nothing with Elara than a king in your house of cards," Julian said, stepping down the porch until he was face to face with the man who had stolen his youth. "Get off my land. And if you ever even look in Elara's direction again, I'll make sure the rest of your life is spent in a courtroom answering for the kidnapping and gaslighting of your own son." The power shift was absolute. Arthur looked at Julian and saw a man he could no longer break. Without a word, he turned, got into his car, and vanished into the darkness of the woods. 6 months later. The old oak tree was still there, its branches wider and more resilient than they were 10 years ago. The world had changed. Julian had stepped down from the Thorne empire and started his own venture, one built on supporting local businesses and ethical growth. I was his partner in every sense, finally using my skills to build something that mattered. We were happy, truly and deeply happy. We stood under the tree where it all began, the summer air sweet with the scent of wild clover. The sun was setting behind the hills in a blaze of orange, gold, and pink, the colors of a new beginning. "You know," Julian said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, navy velvet box. "I might have forgotten your name for a little while. I might have lived a decade in the dark." He dropped to one knee, the long grass rustling beneath him. He looked up at me with eyes that were clear, bright, and full of the boy I once knew. "But I promised to spend every single morning for the next 50 years saying your name so loud the whole world hears it. Elara Vance. You were my first love, my only love, and my greatest memory. Will you marry me? For real this time." Tears of pure joy blurred my vision as I looked at the man who had fought through a mountain of lies to find his way back to me. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times yes." As he slipped the diamond ring onto my finger, a light breeze blew through the oak leaves, sounding like a sigh of relief from the universe itself. We had met again after 10 years, and this time we were never letting go.